Welcome to one of the most unsettling and forgotten episodes recorded in early American history. Before we begin, take a moment to tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is as you listen. It's always remarkable to see how far and wide these hidden stories travel. In the year 1847, on a sprawling cotton plantation outside Savannah, Georgia, events began to unfold that would be buried in county ledgers and private letters for more than a century. The Whitmore estate, framed by its marble white columns and vast oaks dripping with Spanish moss, stood as a monument to Southern wealth and respectability. But beneath its carefully maintained exterior, a quiet storm of secrecy and guilt was gathering, one that would consume every life it touched. The first trace of something unusual appears in a parish record dated April 23, 1847, penned by Reverend Amos Greeley. It reads, "Young Master Whitmore absent from Sunday service for 6th week. Father claims illness, though Dr. Halverson reports no summons from the estate." The Whitmores had been part of Savannah society since before the Revolution. Silas Whitmore, a prosperous merchant who had expanded into plantation ownership, was known for his sharp business sense and his expansive collection of imported books and curiosities. His wife, Margaret, had died during childbirth years earlier, along with their newborn daughter, leaving only Jonathan Whitmore, their son, as heir to the estate and the family fortune. Jonathan had recently returned from his education in the North, a graduate of Harvard, carrying ideas his father called dangerous modernisms. He was 23 that spring, serious, intelligent, and quietly restless. Among the Whitmore household records from 1846, one name stands out, Clara, a young woman purchased from a failing plantation in Virginia. Her record lists her as 19, literate, and trained in domestic duties, a skill set rare enough to double her market price. She was baptized, though her parentage is marked simply as unknown. The Whitmore mansion itself was typical of the time, 3 stories tall, overlooking the river, with a formal garden, separate kitchen house and quarters for the enslaved, situated beyond a grove of magnolias, out of sight from guests. Days on the plantation followed a predictable rhythm. The creak of wagons, the hum of insects, the ringing of St. Paul's church bell drifting across the fields. But by early spring, the mood on the property began to change. Neighbors later told investigators that a strange tension hung in the air, something unspoken, like a cord stretched too tight. Silas Whitmore's business journal reveals the first signs of his growing unease. Jonathan again absent from dinner. Claims to be reading, yet books remain untouched. His habits have grown peculiar. Must consider sterner guidance. Another entry from May reads, "Son requests private meeting regarding household management." Suggests absurd reforms. Education has filled his head with folly. Society pages from the Savannah Republican still listed Jonathan's attendance at local balls that winter, in company with the Beauregard and Rutledge families. But by March, his name had vanished from mention. In the preserved diary of Mary Beauregard, daughter of one of Savannah's most prominent families, there is an entry that reads, "Mr. Whitmore declined mother's invitation again." That makes the 3rd time this month. Father says Mr. Silas is concerned, but speaks little of it. Within the household, servants began to whisper. The head cook, Esther, told the housekeeper that Jonathan had been seen entering the kitchen house after dark, requesting meals at odd hours, and that he specifically asked for Clara to bring them to his quarters. Clara's presence in the house was noted from the beginning. Estate ledgers describe her as refined in appearance and bearing with a manner pleasing to guests. Even Silas, in his private notes, remarked, "Her complexion fair, likely descended from house servants for generations, a valuable acquisition." That summer was brutal, the kind of Georgia heat that pressed against the skin and made tempers short. Ice shipments from Savannah nearly doubled, according to receipts found in the estate ledger. Silas's journal entries became erratic, refused supper invitation from the Rutledges, claims migraine, saw him wandering garden paths past midnight, missing items from Margaret's old chest.
Questioned servants. No one admits guilt. On June 12th, Dr. James Halverson, the family physician, made a house call.
His notes read, "Summoned to Whitmore Plantation, not for the young master as presumed, but for female house servant." Symptoms indicate nervous exhaustion. Advised rest and removal from ordinary duties. Mr. Whitmore Sr. most agitated. Patient placed in East Guest Room, a strange choice for one of her station. After that, deliveries to the plantation recorded raised voices from the study. Odd. Silences at dinner, and letters sent northward with unfamiliar handwriting. A visiting tutor from a neighboring plantation later testified that he once saw Jonathan and Clara near the garden wall, standing too close, speaking too intently, before breaking apart when they realized they were being watched. By July of 1847, things had reached a breaking point. Church records show that Silas Whitmore met privately with Reverend Greeley 3 Wednesdays in a row. The contents of those meetings are lost, but soon after, Silas contacted a trader in Savannah to arrange the sale of Clara, despite having purchased her only months before. The transaction was scheduled for July 28th. The night before, July 27th, the Whitmore house hosted a dinner meant to welcome the Rutledge family, including their eldest daughter Catherine, long considered a potential match for Jonathan. But the Rutledges never arrived. Instead, sometime around 4 p.m., a rider brought a sealed letter addressed to Jonathan. He read it, folded it quietly, and walked back to the house without a word. Minutes later, he requested a private meeting with his father. The housekeeper, Mrs. Warren, later said she heard raised voices behind the study door, the kind of anger that makes walls hum. The argument lasted nearly an hour. When Jonathan emerged, his face was pale but composed. He went straight to his room and did not reappear until dinner. That evening, father and son ate together in near silence. Witnesses recalled that Silas's gaze lingered on Clara, who served at the table while Jonathan stared at his plate, untouched food cooling before him. After dinner, Silas retreated to the library with a decanter of brandy. Jonathan told Mrs. Warren he intended to ride into Savannah for business and asked that his horse be readied. He departed just after sunset. He returned near midnight. What happened next would haunt that house forever. The house was silent when Jonathan returned, the kind of stillness that makes every floorboard creak like a confession. He stabled his horse himself, something none of the hands had ever seen him do, and entered the house through the side door that led past the old library. What occurred in the following hours has been reconstructed only from fragments of testimony in the surviving journals found later among the Whitmore papers. Sometime around 2 a.m, Mrs. Warren, the housekeeper, was startled awake by a sound that shattered the night. A heavy crash from downstairs, as though a cabinet had been overturned. Gripping a lamp, she descended the staircase and crept toward the source. From the library came a flicker of lamplight through the half-open door. She pushed it slightly wider and saw Silas Whitmore standing unsteadily beside his desk, one hand gripping the edge as if to steady himself. Before him stood Jonathan, motionless except for his trembling hands. Scattered across the carpet were papers, ledgers, and small valuables from the wall safe, which Silas had kept hidden behind a portrait of his late wife, Margaret. Among them lay a small leather-bound book. Jonathan held it open, reading aloud in a low voice that Mrs. Warren could not fully make out, only the tremor in his tone and the way Silas seemed to shrink with every word. When Jonathan finished, he dropped the book to the floor. His father slumped back into his chair, white as ash, his mouth moving but no sound emerging. Mrs. Warren, terrified, backed away before she was seen and returned to her quarters, her lamp shaking in her hands. By dawn, the estate was awake to chaos. Silas Whitmore had been found in the same chair, still breathing but unable to move or speak. Dr. Halverson arrived within the hour and diagnosed a cerebral event of catastrophic nature. The right side of Silas's body was paralyzed, his speech gone. He lingered between consciousness and stupor, muttering only once, a single word no one could decipher. But that was not the only shock of the morning. Clara was missing. Her small bundle of clothing remained in her quarters, her Bible still open on the table. No one had seen her since the previous evening. Jonathan, calm in a way that unsettled the entire household, organized a search of the grounds. The men combed the riverbanks, the garden, even the stables, but found nothing. No footprints, no torn fabric, no sign of flight. When Reverend Greeley called that afternoon, he found Jonathan seated beside his father's bed, composed and courteous. When asked whether he had notified the sheriff about Clara's disappearance, Jonathan simply replied that she likely found her way to family in the north, then changed the subject. From that day on, Jonathan took over the running of the plantation. Though it was the natural course of succession, the timing made the transition abrupt. To his father's business associates, he appeared efficient, even gifted. The cotton was sold on favorable terms, the books balanced precisely, and wages paid on time. The overseer, Mr. Green, wrote in his journal, "Young Mr. Whitmore has his father's sharp head for accounts, but none of his warmth." Silas lingered for nearly 11 months, speechless in the library-turned-sick room. Jonathan hired a nurse from Savannah to tend him and rarely left his side for long. Yet witnesses said there was no tenderness in his manner, only duty. The topic of Clara's disappearance was never mentioned again. No official notice was filed. The ledger page listing her purchase and value was later found scratched through with heavy ink. During the winter that followed, Jonathan became increasingly withdrawn. He declined every social invitation and spent most evenings in the study, surrounded by correspondence addressed to Philadelphia, Boston, and New York. The local postmaster later recalled thick envelopes posted northward, often requiring additional postage, letters that never reached any surviving recipient. In September of 1847, county records show a curious entry: J. Whitmore, trustee, purchasing a small property on the outskirts of Savannah. The deed lists a modest house and 2 acres under the name J.W. Trust. The property stood isolated among pine trees near the river, and though smoke was sometimes seen rising from its chimney, neighbors could never quite identify who lived there. By spring of 1848, gossip had replaced sympathy. Savannah society, always eager for scandal, whispered that Jonathan Whitmore had become a recluse, perhaps mad. Catherine Rutledge, once his presumed fiancée, was married that May to a Georgian cotton broker. The announcement in the Savannah Mercury contained a curious note: previous understandings dissolved by mutual respect. On June 15, 1848, Silas Whitmore finally died, having never spoken another word. His funeral drew half the city, merchants and planters alike, paying their respects to a man who had embodied Southern success. Jonathan stood beside the casket, perfectly still, his expression unreadable. The few who attended later said he seemed present but unreachable, as though his mind were already far away. The will was read the following week, everything left to Jonathan. There were no surprises, no disputes. Within a month, he began selling parts of the plantation, starting with the outer cotton fields. The process was orderly and deliberate. Then, in November 1848, came the final announcement. Jonathan Whitmore would depart for Europe for an extended period of travel. He appointed his father's longtime associate, Mr. Richard Lowell, as steward of the remaining estate, giving him full authority in business matters. The Savannah Republican published a small notice. Mr. Jonathan Whitmore, having settled the affairs of his late father, departs for Europe aboard the SS Caledonia next week. His journey will begin in Liverpool, with plans to tour the continent indefinitely. What the newspaper did not report, but what port records later confirmed, was that Jonathan Whitmore booked 2 passages, not 1. The manifest listed a Mrs. J.B. Whitmore as his companion, though no such woman existed in Savannah society, and no marriage had ever been announced. The night before his departure, James, the stable master, recalled seeing a closed carriage arrive at the Whitmore estate after dusk. The driver remained seated, while a woman, heavily veiled, stepped down and entered the side door. 2 hours later, the carriage left empty. At sunrise, Jonathan departed for Savannah with 2 trunks and a small locked valise. He took no servants, unusual for a man of his status, and gave only one instruction to Mrs. Warren. See the house kept as it is. Nothing added, nothing removed. From that morning forward, the Whitmore mansion stood silent. For the next 5 years, Mr. Lowell managed the property, receiving occasional letters from Europe, thin envelopes stamped from Geneva, Paris, and Vienna, each written in Jonathan's precise hand, always polite and always impersonal. They spoke only of accounts, harvest yields, and the sale of assets. In 1853, Instructions arrived from Zurich, written in Jonathan's unmistakable script. Dispose of remaining lands. Liquidate the estate. Transfer all proceeds to the London branch of Barclays Bank, in my name. After that, the Whitmore name disappeared from Savannah's records altogether, for nearly a century. The story might have remained buried, if not for an extraordinary discovery made by a university historian in 1962. While cataloguing antebellum manuscripts, she came across a leather-bound journal, its cover worn, its pages delicate with age. The author was Margaret Whitmore, Jonathan's mother, and within it lay the key to everything. The historian, Dr. Margaret Collins of the University of Georgia, was researching social records from antebellum Savannah when she found the Whitmore journal in a box labeled only Miskin Family Papers, 19th century. The book was bound in soft brown leather, its clasp broken and its pages filled with fine, slanted handwriting. The entries began around 1831, the year of Margaret's marriage to Silas Whitmore, and ended abruptly just before her death. At first, the writings were unremarkable, notes about dinner guests, the weather, the upbringing of young Jonathan. But as Dr. Collins read deeper, she noticed the tone shift. In an entry dated May 1836, Margaret described discovering a set of letters hidden in her husband's desk. They revealed a long-kept secret. Years before his marriage, Silas had fathered a child with an enslaved woman on a neighboring plantation. That woman, according to the papers, had died giving birth. The child, a girl, had survived. Silas had arranged for her to be raised quietly among the enslaved on a nearby estate, sending small sums of money over the years to ensure her safety. The child's name was Clara. Margaret's later entries are filled with anguish and indecision. One reads, "How could he hide this from me all these years? To know that his blood runs in a child the world would call unworthy. I cannot find peace, yet I pity the girl, for she bears the mark of no sin of her own." In another, written months before her death, she confided her intent to confront Silas after giving birth to their second child. "If the Lord spares me, I will speak plainly to him. He must provide for her, acknowledge her as his own in some discreet but decent way." Secrets such as this rot the soul of a house. That was the final entry. Margaret died in childbirth days later. The revelation was devastating. It meant that the young woman Silas later purchased from Virginia, the educated house servant called Clara, was not bought at all. She had been brought home. The sale document, the claim of Virginia origin, the fabricated paper trail, it had all been a cover to bring Silas's daughter into his own household, under the guise of property. The note Silas had written years earlier about her refined manner and light complexion suddenly made haunting sense, and if Clara was Silas's daughter, then Jonathan, the son who fell in love with her, was her half-brother. The small leather book that Jonathan had found in the wall safe that night, the one he had read aloud to his father before the stroke, was almost certainly Margaret Whitmore's journal. It explained the horror that overtook Silas in that instant, the silence that followed, the stroke that left him paralyzed. It explained Clara's sudden disappearance and the secrecy that cloaked Jonathan's departure. Dr. Collins's discovery transformed what had once seemed a scandalous love story into something infinitely more tragic. Two young people drawn together by affection, by shared loneliness, without ever knowing the blood that connected them. In her research notes, Dr. Collins wrote, "It appears both Jonathan and Clara were ignorant of their relation until that night. The mother's journal, hidden in the safe, was the key. Once Jonathan read it aloud, the truth destroyed them both. But the story did not end there. In the same archives, Dr. Collins found a property deed dated August 1848, the same year Silas died, transferring a small house outside Savannah from the J.W. Trust to Clara Benton, a name that appeared nowhere else in regional records. The description of the property matched the mysterious 2-acre cottage Jonathan had purchased under a trust months earlier. It was signed by his own hand. The following line in the deed's margin, in faint ink, read, "For her safety and peace." Dr. Collins concluded that Clara had not fled the Whitmore estate in fear or disgrace, but had been hidden, moved quietly to that house with Jonathan's help after his father's stroke. And then, when he left for Europe, she went with him. The next thread came from shipping logs from the port of Savannah. The ship manifest for the SS Caledonia confirmed a Mrs. J.B. Whitmore traveling in first class beside Mr. J. Whitmore. The initials matched none of the known Savannah families. Historians now believe this was Clara traveling under the name Mrs. Jane Benton Whitmore, the identity Jonathan had arranged. For nearly a decade after their departure, the world heard nothing more of them. The Whitmore estate was sold in parcels, the great house eventually abandoned. Local children whispered it was haunted by a woman in white seen near the Magnolias. In 1962, Dr. Collins's research caught the attention of a Swiss archivist who uncovered a property record from Geneva, dated 1849, listing an American couple, William and Jane Harrison, purchasing a modest villa near Lake Geneva. The ages, nationality, and deposit records matched those of Jonathan and Clara. The archivist noted the husband's occupation as man of independent means and the wife's as artist. The initials on the purchase deed read W.H., the same initials. Jonathan had used for the Whitmore family's shipping crates in the parish register of a small Protestant church near the villa. The same names appear again, William Harrison and wife Jane. From America, communicants received into congregation. Their neighbors, interviewed decades later, described them as polite but private, speaking French with a soft southern accent, seldom entertaining visitors. They never mentioned America. They had no children. The local physician's notes from that period provide the most intimate glimpse into their lives. A certain Dr. Henri Beaumont, who treated them occasionally, recorded that Madame Harrison suffers melancholy in the autumn, brought on by recollections of youth. Her husband shows great devotion, yet bears some invisible weight of sorrow. One passage from Beaumont's papers stands out. Mr. Harrison confided that they cannot have children. He said only, "Some barriers of blood cannot be crossed without consequence." His eyes filled with grief as he spoke, and I felt I had stepped upon sacred ground. Those words hinted at what Jonathan and Clara had learned from the journal, that their love, pure as it may have felt, could never be reconciled with the truth of their parentage. Still, they lived quietly and, by all accounts, contentedly in Switzerland for many years. Clara, now Jane Harrison, painted landscapes and portraits that occasionally appeared in small Geneva exhibitions. Her most haunting work, completed around 1862, depicts a young woman standing beside a garden wall, her face turned away from the viewer. In the distance stands a white-columned house beneath a canopy of trees. The painting is titled simply Memory of Home. It is signed with the initials A.H. Even then, she could not completely erase who she had been. For many years, the traces of the couple known as William and Jane Harrison were faint but consistent. Dr. Collins, piecing them together from Swiss archives, noted that tax ledgers listed the Harrisons as long-term residents near Lake Geneva, their modest estate surrounded by gardens and olive trees imported from Italy. They lived there quietly for nearly 25 years. Neighbors remembered the villa for its ivy-covered walls and the faint sound of piano music drifting from open windows on warm evenings. Local children were sometimes invited to pick fruit from the orchard by the gentle American lady, who spoke French slowly and smiled often, but always seemed distant, as if her thoughts wandered elsewhere. In 1866, property documents show that the Harrisons purchased the parcel of land adjoining their villa and built a small studio. There Jane began to paint with greater purpose. Her work, mostly landscapes of the lake, the mountains beyond, and the surrounding gardens, found modest appreciation among the small art circles of Geneva. But even then, she refused to exhibit under her full name. Every canvas bore only the initials A.H. Dr. Collins later observed. The choice of initials rather than full name was deliberate. It preserved anonymity but also truth. The A was not for Jane or Anna as she called herself in Europe, but for the name that could not be spoken, Adeline or Clara, the life she had left behind. In 1873, the Harrison villa was sold. The couple vanished from Swiss records as quietly as they had arrived. Their bank account at the Geneva branch of Crédit Lyonnais was closed that same year, and a large deposit appeared shortly after in the ledgers of a London bank. From there, the trail led south to Florence, Italy. In the spring of 1874, Italian land deeds record the purchase of a small olive farm just outside Florence by William and Anna Harrison, citizens of the United States. The ages and signatures matched those of the Geneva couple. The description of Anna, light complexion, about 46, American nationality, fit the woman once known as Clara Whitmore. The Harrisons seem to have sought deeper privacy in the Tuscan countryside. Local parish documents note that they attended services at a small Protestant chapel, but rarely socialized. Villagers who remembered them decades later described the quiet Americans who kept to themselves, the lady who painted, and the gentleman who read in the garden. Dr. Collins's research uncovered a single line in the register of a local physician. Dr. Carlo Bianchi, dated February 1876. Signor Guglielmo Harrison, aged 52, succumbed to lung inflammation following winter illness. His wife, Anna, arranged for simple burial at Church Cemetery. The grave still exists today, a weathered stone among the olive trees, bearing only the inscription, William H., born of one world, found peace in another. After William's death, Anna remained at the farmhouse for another 11 years. Tax rolls show her continuing to pay local levies and maintaining ownership of the property. Villagers called her La Signora Americana, the American lady. She was seen painting in the fields at dawn, carrying a small stool and canvas, her gray hair pulled back beneath a scarf. She sold small paintings to travelers passing through Florence, enough to sustain herself comfortably. Then, in 1887, the property was sold to an Italian family. The sale documents were signed in a shaky hand, A. Harrison. After that, the name disappears from Italian records. For years, historians assumed that Anna died somewhere in Italy, her grave lost or unmarked. But Dr. Collins, continuing her investigation through the late 1960s, found a clue that reopened the mystery. In the archives of a women's boarding house in Rome, a register from November 1887 listed A. Harrison, American widow, age approximate 60, artist. The establishment catered to unmarried or widowed women of modest means, teachers, writers, small-time painters. Anna had apparently moved there after selling the farm. The boarding house kept records until 1893 when it closed. After that, the trail again went cold. Then came the most astonishing find of all. Passenger manifests from the port of Naples for the year 1890 listed a Mrs. A. Harrison, age 62, among the second-class passengers bound for New York City aboard the steamship Etruria. Her last residence was given as Italy. Was this Anna Clara, returning to America after more than 40 years in exile? Dr. Collins believed so. She noted that by the 1890s, the rigid social boundaries of the antebellum South had begun to crumble under the memory of war. Perhaps the widow sought to die in her homeland, to make peace with her ghosts. What followed added another layer to the riddle. In 1965, nearly 75 years after that voyage, renovation workers in a brownstone in Boston's Back Bay district discovered a hidden compartment behind an attic wall. Inside was a small tin box containing several objects: a pressed magnolia flower, a daguerreotype of a young man in formal dress, a small leather notebook with blank pages save for an inscription. To A, from W. Remember only what brings peace, and a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon. The letters were dated 1891 to 1894, written in elegant script on thick paper and signed simply A. They were addressed to my dearest friend M. The contents revealed the thoughts of an elderly woman reflecting on her past from a boarding house in Boston's South End. In one letter she wrote, "You ask why I returned after so long. Perhaps it was to close the circle, to end where it began, though not in the same place. The South holds no comfort. Too many ghosts walk those gardens. But here among strangers I find peace. No one asks, and I offer no answers." Another letter, dated December 1892, carried the most direct allusion to her hidden life. "You wish to know of my years abroad. I cannot tell you. Some stories cannot be spoken, even after all who lived them are gone. What was love to others was exile to us. We were judged by the laws of men, not by the truth of hearts. Still, I would not trade 1 hour of that love for a lifetime of respectability." The final letter, written in April 1894, reads like a farewell. My health fails as the winter recedes. I do not fear what comes. My life has been more than was ever intended for me. The little paintings I leave you are my story. In them are gardens, lakes, and sunlit groves, places where I found peace when peace was forbidden. Remember me kindly. No record of Anna Harrison's death appears in Boston's municipal archives under that name. It is possible she adopted yet another identity before her final days. The brownstone where the letters were found had changed ownership many times since the 1890s, leaving no clue to the identity of M, the friend who received them. Dr. Collins, who first read those letters, described them as the quiet echo of two silenced lives, whispered back through time. The story might have remained the secret. Obsession of a few historians, if not for what came next. The discovery of new correspondence that confirmed the role of another figure in their escape, the one man who had known the truth from the beginning. In the years following the publication of Dr. Collins's initial findings, interest in the Whitmore, or as they became known in Europe, the Harrison, story grew quietly among academic circles. Historians debated whether the documents could all refer to the same people. Some argued coincidence, others insisted the trail of handwriting, bank transactions, and signatures was too consistent to ignore. Then, in 1978, an unexpected discovery settled the question. A descendant of Richard Lowell, the man who had managed the Whitmore estate after Jonathan's departure, found a small bundle of yellowed letters among family papers. They were written from Switzerland between 1849 and 1852 and addressed to Lowell at the Whitmore plantation, still under his supervision. The sender's name at the bottom of each letter was unmistakable: Jonathan Whitmore. Most of the letters concerned business, shipment instructions, payment authorizations, directives regarding the sale of property, but one contained something entirely different. You must understand, Jonathan wrote in April 1850, that I have asked your discretion not merely for my sake but for that of another. I trust you recall your promise to my late mother in the matter of her journal. It was her wish that the truth, should it ever come to light, be met not with condemnation but with compassion. I have endeavored to honor that wish. Another letter, dated August 1851, ended with a request that confirmed what Dr. Collins had long suspected. Should any inquiry be made about the young woman formerly in my father's household, you may say only that she has been safely settled and wishes no contact with former acquaintances. Let no rumors take root. The world would not understand. Lowell's marginal notes, scribbled in pencil decades later, revealed even more. He wrote, I knew from the beginning what had passed between them. Mrs. Margaret entrusted me with her journal before her death, bidding me protect her children should truth ever harm them. When young Jonathan discovered the same, I helped arrange their passage from Savannah. It was the least I could do. This single sentence transformed Lowell from a minor estate steward into the quiet architect of their escape, the man who ensured the pair could flee before scandal or violence destroyed them both. Dr. Collins, upon reading the letters, wrote in her notes, It appears Richard Lowell acted on a deathbed promise to Margaret Whitmore, safeguarding the very secret that later condemned her family. He understood the horror that discovery would bring and, perhaps against his conscience, chose mercy over exposure. The Lowell correspondence also hinted that he had kept a single artifact from the night of Silas's stroke, the leather-bound journal itself. Though it was never found among his descendants' possessions, its absence lends weight to the belief that Jonathan took it with him when he fled. By the early 1980s, the Whitmore story had begun to fade from public attention again, until yet another object emerged, one that seemed to capture in oil and pigment everything words could not. In 1982, a small museum in Boston acquired a collection of 19th-century paintings from the estate of an anonymous donor. Among them was a modest canvas, roughly 20 inches across, unsigned on the front but bearing faint initials on the back. A.H., the museum curator, unaware of its significance, catalogued it as untitled landscape with figures. It showed two people walking along a tree-lined path, their backs to the viewer. The man leaned slightly on the woman's arm as they moved toward distant hills. Art historians later identified the landscape as unmistakably Tuscan, near Florence. It was only when Dr. Collins viewed the piece during an exhibition that she recognized its connection. The initials matched those of the Geneva painting, Memory of Home, long attributed to Anna Harrison. But this one, more intimate and unfinished, seemed to tell the final chapter of their story. Faint pencil markings on the back of the frame read, "The Path Chosen." The symbolism was unmistakable. The painting captured not the grandeur of exile, but the quiet endurance of two people who had chosen love over law, understanding over convention. The figures were aged, stooped slightly, yet their closeness radiated tenderness. Dr. Collins later wrote in her journal, "It is not a portrait of escape, but of acceptance. Whatever sins the world ascribed to them, they had long ceased to care. They had walked their chosen path to its end." In the years that followed, the painting became the emotional centerpiece of the Whitmore-Harrison archive, displayed beside reproductions of the letters and facsimiles of Margaret Whitmore's original journal pages. Visitors were drawn less to the academic details and more to the palpable humanity that lingered in every line, every brushstroke. The deeper significance of their story began to resonate beyond historians. It entered discussions on family secrecy, social hierarchy, and the blurred lines of racial identity in the antebellum South. Scholars noted that the Whitmores' tragedy was not simply a forbidden romance, but a collision between the hypocrisy of slavery and the universality of human attachment. Dr. Collins summarized it best. Their love did not defy society because it was scandalous. It defied society because it was honest. She spent the remainder of her career piecing together smaller fragments of their lives. Shipping receipts, letters of credit, even the bill of sale for Clara that Silas had falsified to conceal her identity. She also traced the journey of the Whitmore estate itself, which had burned to the ground during the Civil War, leaving only the stone foundations visible today beneath a suburban development outside Savannah. When asked in an interview what she found most haunting about the case, Dr. Collins replied, that two lives could be erased so thoroughly, their truth buried under propriety and silence, and yet survive through art and love. They refused to vanish completely. They left their shadows in ink, in canvas, in whispers. By the late 1990s, the Whitmore affair was cited in university lectures and history texts as a study in moral ambiguity, identity, and the persistence of memory. Yet Dr. Collins knew the heart of it would never be fully captured by footnotes or exhibitions. There remained one last mystery. When exactly did Jonathan and Clara realize the truth of their blood connection? The documents never revealed it. Some scholars believe Jonathan discovered it first, on the night he read his mother's journal. Others argued that both learned it together, perhaps even as he read the words aloud. Whatever the case, they chose to stay bound, not as siblings, but as souls who had already given their hearts long before they understood the cost. Their exile, far from being punishment, became a form of freedom, a self-imposed silence where no one could judge them except themselves. And so, through scattered letters, half-finished paintings and forgotten graves, the world caught only brief glimpses of two people who lived in defiance of the boundaries that defined their age. The story might have ended there, sealed in the archives and classrooms, had not the 21st century brought one final act of remembrance, a digital resurrection that ensured their voices, however faint, would never fade again. By the early 2000s, what had once been a private academic curiosity evolved into a full digital archive. The University of South Carolina, where Dr. Margaret Collins had spent most of her career, launched an initiative titled Across Boundaries: Alternative Family Structures in Antebellum America. At its center stood the Whitmore-Harrison collection, scanned pages of Margaret Whitmore's journal, Jonathan's business correspondence, facsimiles of Clara's paintings, and letters written under the names Anna or Jane Harrison. For the first time in more than a century, the fragmented lives of two people once erased by shame and secrecy became visible again, studied, discussed, and preserved. Visitors who opened the digital exhibit could trace their journey from the Whitmore estate in Georgia to the olive fields of Tuscany. From the whispering magnolias to the still waters of Lake Geneva, Dr. Collins, by then retired, wrote the introduction to the online archive. Her words remain there today, serving as both epitaph and warning. Their story is exceptional, yes, but not unique. For every William and Clara who crossed forbidden lines, countless others were silenced by law, by fear, or by the slow decay of memory. Their tragedy reminds us that history is not just written by those who won, but by those whose secrets survived long enough to be found. Within a year, the archive drew thousands of visitors from around the world. Art historians examined Clara's paintings, tracing her brushwork through surviving works in European collections. Her technique, though untrained, showed sensitivity and restraint, an artist painting not for fame, but for remembrance. Her recurring subjects, walls, gates, and paths, seemed to echo her own life, always at the threshold, never fully inside. Scholars of genealogy found something more personal in the Whitmore story. Through cross-referencing plantation records, they identified possible descendants of Silas Whitmore's other relatives still living in the South. For them, the revelations were both astonishing and painful. A few chose to publicly acknowledge their ancestral connection to the merchant who had hidden a daughter born of bondage. One descendant wrote in a university guest book, "For generations our family spoke only of the wealth, never the wounds. Now I understand both belong to us." The painting "The Path Chosen" became the emotional centerpiece of the archive's traveling exhibition. Displayed under low light in a climate-controlled case, it drew quiet crowds who stood before it in silence, as though afraid to break its spell. Many remarked that the unfinished edges, the faint pencil lines still visible where Clara had planned to fill in the sky, felt symbolic, as if the story itself, like the painting, had been left incomplete on purpose. In 2005, the Smithsonian's Museum of American History hosted the exhibit under the title "Love and Silence: The Whitmore Legacy." Visitors moved through dimly lit rooms where artifacts from the story were displayed: letters, journals, legal documents, and reproductions of Clara's art. An audio recording played softly in the background. Excerpts from Margaret's journal read aloud by an actress, her words layered with faint sounds of distant church bells and turning pages. At the exhibition's end, a simple question was projected on the final wall. If you knew the truth would destroy your world, would you still seek it? Those who lingered longest in front of that wall often left without speaking. In academic circles, the Whitmore-Harrison case became a cornerstone example of how fragmented evidence can be woven into coherent narrative, a living reminder that every scrap of paper, every ledger entry, and every forgotten portrait might contain the heartbeat of a buried life. But for most people who encountered the story online or through documentaries, it transcended scholarship. It became something human, tender, and tragic, a love that shouldn't have existed yet somehow endured. In interviews, Dr. Collins reflected on why the story refused to fade. "Because it forces us to confront what it means to love across the lines drawn by society," she said. "And because, deep down, we recognize the courage it took for them to choose each other over everything they were told was sacred." When she died in 2011, her ashes were scattered on the university grounds where the archive she had built continued to grow. In her honor, a small gallery space was named the Collins Room. Inside, a framed reproduction of Clara's memory of home hangs on the wall. Beneath it, a simple plaque reads, "Some stories are never truly concluded, only rediscovered." Even now, the Whitmore Mansion's foundation still lies beneath a quiet subdivision outside Savannah. Children play above the buried stones where once stood the grand pillars of Southern gentility, unaware of the secrets sealed in the soil beneath their feet. No historical marker identifies the site. Yet every so often, someone researching property deeds comes across the old name, Whitmore Plantation, and follows the thread into the archive, falling into a story too haunting to forget. Those who visit the Swiss museum that still holds the original memory of home find it tucked in a side gallery, labeled only Anonymous American, E1862. It shows the woman with her face turned slightly away from the viewer, standing beside a garden wall. Behind her, almost hidden in shadow, is the faint outline of a house with white columns. No plaque tells who she was. But if you look closely, the artist's initials, AH, remain etched faintly into the corner of the canvas. For the casual visitor, it's simply a melancholy painting of another era. For those who know the story, it feels almost alive, as if the woman might turn her head at any moment, revealing the face of the past itself. And perhaps that is the quiet power of their legacy. It doesn't end in scandal or redemption, but in endurance, the persistence of memory through centuries of silence. Jonathan and Clara Whitmore, William and Anna Harrison, left no children, no lineage, no monument. What survives of them exists in fragments: a pressed magnolia, a few letters, 2 paintings, and a journal written by a mother who never lived to see the truth her words would unleash. Yet their story continues to move through the world, whispered in university halls, rediscovered by readers, retold by voices in documentaries like this one. Voices trying, even after 175 years, to make sense of what happened when love crossed the boundaries of blood and law. Theirs is not just a tale of forbidden passion, but a mirror held to the deepest contradictions of a nation built on freedom and bondage, purity and hypocrisy, silence and confession. And in that mirror, we glimpse something timeless, that even amid the cruelty of history, the heart can still choose. And that choice, though doomed, can echo forever. So perhaps it's fitting that no grave bears their names. Their true monument is the story itself, carried through time by those who refuse to let them be forgotten. In the quiet corners of museums and archives, their shadows still linger, the merchant's son and the enslaved woman who dared to love him. And if you listen closely, beneath the hum of gallery lights and the shuffle of distant footsteps, you might almost hear them walking together along that path of their own making, toward the horizon, where judgment ends and memory begins.